everyone, Jill from the North Woods, and we are back into the Bible in Small Steps where we're going through the book of Revelation. And last time we watched the seventh bowl poured out and heard these very big words, "It is done." It echoes the finish that we heard on the cross. It is finished. And Babylon was named in the chapter, judged and remembered before God. So chapter 17 shows us all the ways exactly who Babylon is. It's not just a name and not just a nation, but announced in judgment, but is a full, unsettling picture of a woman dressed in luxury riding a scarlet beast. And boy, you can see where this is going. So this chapter is dense with symbolism and detail. And so we're going to go through this one small step at a time. The first thing that we see is that one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls invites John to come and see the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters and with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and whose wine of sexual immorality the earth inhabitants have become drunk with. And the prostitution and adultery idea has been used throughout primarily the Old Testament. Hosea was told to marry a prostitute who constantly had his heart stomped on, which was an imagery of what Israel was doing to God. Ezekiel 16 and Jeremiah 3 had that idea of spiritual unfaithfulness being tied as sexual immorality. God's people, God's and the nations are chasing after other gods, other sources of security instead of Him. It's idolatry. It's the akin of being unfaithful in a marriage. And God's idea of this is that's what you're doing. When you chase other gods, fake gods, wooden things that aren't real, that don't exist. We've heard this talked about before. Or even, I think the idea of the softer gods, money or power or having a good bank account makes you feel secure. When you chase after these things, it is idolatry of something else. And so we're not, before we get to these very specific categories, the category itself is really clear about this. Counterfeit worship and misplaced loyalty are the same theme. We have tracked not just since the beast in chapter 13, but throughout the entire Bible. It's going to sew up everything. I mean, if you look at it, it sews up everything that is in the Bible. John's carried away in the spirit again into the wilderness and sees a woman sitting on a scarlet beast covered with blasphemous names, having, again, 7 heads, 7 horns, the beast does. It's the same beast from chapter 13, but now carrying this woman rather than acting independently. This woman herself is dressed in purple and scarlet and glittering with gold, jewels, pearls, holding a cup full of abominations and impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead is written a name, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And that's abominations with an S, many abominations. And so then verse 6 gives us detail that makes it clear exactly what kind of power this is. John sees her drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. I think, you think about the people who have died in the faith and are still dying today. I still hear stories about people dying in Syria and people dying in Nigeria just for living their faith. And it's, the blood runs to this very day. It's not a simple luxury or excess, that we might think about. It's because purple was allowed. There was nothing wrong with having purple. Lydia was a purple tradeswoman. But the idea of its luxury and excess is built directly into the persecution of God's people. John says what he thought when that he was greatly astonished when he saw her. Historically, for John, as a first century reader, the description would have called to mind perhaps Rome, and most immediately, specifically a city famous across the ancient world for its wealth, its luxury, its imperial excess. It's especially when you think about under emperors like Nero, later Domitian, these direct um, people who are responsible for the death of Christian martyrs. The purple and scarlet and the gold and the jewels would have matched this idea of the splendor of Rome's imperial life. If you ever watched TV shows or movies about Rome, that's the exact impression that you get. So people would have probably immediately thought about that. But I think it's beyond that, obviously, because Rome is a different place now it is today. So it represents more of an ideal of a worldly power that is growing rich and powerful, while at the same time causing the blood of the saints to happen. And the angel offers an explanation of the mystery of this woman and the beast that carries her. It says that the beast was and is not, and is about to rise from its bottomless pit and go to destruction. This is a deliberate, almost mocking of this counterfeit of God's own description back in chapter 1, verse 8. Who was, who is, who was, and who is to come. The beast's own power is an imitation, a parody of God's own eternal nature, but it's an imitation that ultimately leads to destruction instead of life. Following Christ leads to life, everlasting. Following the beast leads to an end. It leads to torment, eternal torment. And even how this figure describes itself, it is shown to be fundamentally derivative, false. It's trying to be the Trinity, and it can never be the Trinity. It's borrowing a form that it can never fulfill. And so those who dwell on earth, whose names are not written in the book of life that we saw before, will marvel when they see the beast. It's the same phrase we met back in chapter 13, verse 8. The same book of life, the same protection that's extended to God's people. But now people see this evil thing and they marvel at it. Oh boy. And the angel then gets specific about this too. In this section, that generates a lot of historical speculation. And you can imagine how much this very chapter, has created a lot of speculation historically, theologically, like, oh, what is this? Who does this represent? How does this represent? It says that, quote, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads of the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Rome famously was built throughout on 7 hills. Any first century reader would have recognized this is Rome, 7 hills. They wouldn't have needed to explain it. So again, like I said, the first image that would come to mind would have been Rome, and it would have made it more so with these 7 hills. The angel goes on and says that the 7 heads are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain only a little while. And the beast itself is the 8th. So it belongs to the 7, and it goes on to destruction. And like I said, if you look at this honestly here, we've tried to be very, specific with things. When we've seen number passages or numbers in these passages, scholars have spent a lot of time. We know the number of man is 6, right? We know that completeness in Jesus is 7. But now when we're trying to map these 7 and then 8 kings to specific sequences of, is it Rome's emperors? Counting on, each one of Rome's emperors? Is it 7 different nations? I've seen different explanations for it. And that flexibility itself is a signal to me that I think, again, we should not try to hold any sort of identification here. I think when this happens, we'll be like, oh, I get it now. I see what just happened here. I think it's the same thing. Like people said there's going to be a Messiah, and he's going to be the suffering servant, but he's going to be triumphant, but he's going to be the king. And everyone's like, I don't know how one person fits all these things. I think this is true here. We could look at this and go, I don't get who this is or what this is. And then when it happens, people go, oh, I get it now. So we don't know any specific identification on that. But what the text communicates clearly, regardless of which view you have, if this is emperors, if this is nations, whatever it is that the earthly power is temporary. It's limited in its duration, even at its height. And ultimately, it's headed towards its own destruction, no matter how permanent this kingdom idea is. Those people are like, you know what? Nothing's ever going to happen to Rome. I bet you asked people back in those days, no, Rome's around forever. But I also bet that if you asked people living in Babylon, oh, no, Babylon's here forever. It's going to consume the earth. Oh, Persia's going to, you get the idea. But it all has an end. It all has an end. So then these 10 horns are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who have received authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. They have a purpose, and their purpose is to give their power and authority to the beast, and they will make war on the Lamb. So verse 14 gives us that in a single sentence, that the outcome of this entire war, even before it's fully described, the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And to those with him are called and are chosen and are faithful. And so it's not an accident that Revelation tells us the ending before we even walk through the details of what's going to happen. You know what? They can say they're going to give power and glory to the beast and these nations, and remember, horns represent power. It doesn't even matter. We know who's going to win in this. And we've seen this repeated pattern throughout the entire book. Satan's defeat is already accomplished. It was accomplished in chapter 12 before his war against the believers. Babylon's fall was already announced in chapter 14 before it was fully carried out. What we're going to get to in chapter 18, the scripture keeps giving us the outcomes first on purpose. So then we see how it unfolds. And I think the idea is that we're never supposed to wonder who's going to win. Like, it's not this great piece of literature that says, oh, gee, I sure hope Iron Man comes out in the end. We know who's going to win in the end. We know how this ends. And I think it's to make sure that people aren't afraid, to make sure that they understand how this plays out. No matter how scary this is, we know who wins. So then it says that the angel explains one more thing in the image, that the water that the woman sits on is described back in verse 1 are the people and the multitudes and the nations and the languages. Her power and influence extends across every kind of human society. It's not a group of people. It's not a nation of people. It's all sorts of people that are in this group. And then comes to a startling turn in all of this. The 10 horns and the beast will actually turn against the prostitute themselves. They will hate her, and they will make her desolate, naked, devour her flesh, and burned up with fire. The very power that carried her and drew her authority up is ultimately going to consume her. It's sobering, I guess, in almost this very cynical picture of worldly power and how it really functions. And I think we see that, right? That loyalty that lasts as long as it serves the beast's own purposes. And once it doesn't, it turns into destruction the moment afterwards. And we see that, I think, with sin, that you, I don't know how you want to phrase it, but people who are living their lives in deep sin, that they can't trust the people around them. There's no loyalty when it comes to life in sin itself. And even this woman who looks glorious and has all the trappings of this world, eventually the beast and all its throngs of people, they're gonna take her out too. There's nothing sacred on that side of things. And so this chapter closes then by naming the woman directly. The woman you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Whatever historical reference that stood behind this image, it's almost certain that John's readers would have recognized this as Rome, as the strongest candidate. It's a pattern that the scriptures has recognized, and warned believers against in every ages. That is not just Rome. Worldly power, wealth, influence, built on exploitation, on the blood of God's people. It's genuinely seductive. It's impressive to look at, and ultimately is temporary, self-consuming, and already defeated by the Lamb before the final battle is even fought. What I'm going to meditate this week is the idea that the Lamb conquers them. He's the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, and this chapter shows us that worldly power, at its most seductive, gold, jewels, purple, scarlet, dominion over every nation and every king, tells us plainly that before the battle is even described, who wins. And if you ask yourself, what in the world glitters right now that people marvel at? The way that the kings of the earth are drawn to this woman's cup. And I think that if we see that this world is living in admiration for this kind of earthly power, think about actually what that is, what it really represents more than anything. And I pray that the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, he has no worldly power that's a threat to him. No matter how impressive the worldly power looks from where we're standing right now, there's nothing that's a rival to him. And I think of the times that we get seduced by the glitter around us in this world. And we know that it ultimately consumes instead of giving any sort of promise of reward. So we want God to strengthen our anchor to loyalty in God alone and to the one whose kingdom is not temporary and will never self-consume. It is permanent and forever. And what I would want to share with someone who is maybe confused between power that serves and power that consumes, the kind that the beast and the woman represents in this chapter is consuming. And for people who have placed real security in the glitter, in the marveling of the beast, remind them that there's another kingdom out there that actually lasts. This woman drunk on the blood of the martyrs and riding this beast mimics God's own eternal name and nature. The 7 hills, the 10 kings, the horns, the war to come, we're told in the end. Before we're even told about the battle itself, the Lamb wins. And in a final sobering twist, even the beast's own allies turn and devour the very woman they once carried. And so next time we watch Babylon's fall play out in full. And it's one of the most vivid chapters in the entire book, and a very vivid book overall. So if the beast counterfeit of who is and who was and who is to come struck you as mockery, let me know what you think about that in the comments. What other kinds of counterfeit do we see in this world that represents the beast and the woman that rides the beast? I appreciate you walking through this one with me. I'm Jill from the Northwoods, and you can see everything I do at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. Appreciate you being out there, and see you next time.